A young African leader did what the world thought was impossible. He brought dead land back to life. In the heart of West Africa, a silent revolution is taking root. One not fought with guns or political slogans, but with seeds, sweat, and unstoppable resolve. Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest and boldest president in Burkina Faso's history, has done something the world didn't see coming. He didn't just give speeches. He didn't just promise hope. He led. And he led 10,000 people, mostly women and youth, into the barren and forgotten corners of the Sahel to breathe life back into the earth. Land once written off as dead, cracked by the sun and stripped of nutrients, has now begun to bloom. Again, and the world is watching in awe. Even Donald Trump, a man rarely caught off guard, is said to have been stunned by the scale, speed, not a symbolism of what Traoré is building. This is not just a story of environmental recovery. It is a declaration of independence from the economic and ecological decay left behind by decades of colonial neglect and foreign manipulation. Traoré understood that real sovereignty begins with self-reliance. When your people can feed themselves, power their homes, and heal their own land. So instead of chasing deals with the IMF or bowing to foreign aid conditions, he turned inward. He asked his people to rise, and they did. What began as a reforestation initiative soon became a national movement. Thousands gathered with shovels and seedlings, not just to plant trees, but to plant a future. The result is thousands of acres of land once declared worthless are now green corridors of hope. Stretching across Burkina Faso's rural landscape, what shocks outsiders the most isn't just the ecological miracle, it is the discipline, coordination, and clarity with which Traoré executed the vision. There was no flashy international launch. No expensive consultancy teams flown in from Europe. There was just leadership. It's authentic, grounded, and unapologetically African leadership. In a time when most leaders rely on elite advisors and global summits, Traoré did something ancient and radical. He listened to his people. He empowered them, gave them the tools, the training, and most importantly, the belief that they could change their destiny. In doing so, he may have rewritten the script for what African leadership can truly achieve when it is not compromised by foreign interests. Foreign media is still catching up. Western analysts scratch their heads trying to categorize what's happening in Burkina Faso. Is it a green revolution? A populist movement? A political gamble? The truth is, it's all of that and more. It's a bold reminder that the African continent, often spoken about as a problem to be solved, is a force to be reckoned with. Traoré's forest isn't just a restoration of nature. It's a restoration of identity, of dignity, of possibility. It proves that when a nation dares to believe in its own power, the results can shake even the most powerful observers. And as news of the transformation ripples across continents, so does the realization that Africa's next chapter may not be written in foreign capitals, but by leaders like Traoré, who are not afraid to get their hands dirty. This forest isn't just made of trees, it's made of vision, it's made of struggle, it's made of pride, and to the surprise of many even, voices like Donald Trump have taken notice. Not because of politics, but because of the undeniable power of a people rising behind a leader who dares to dream bigger than borders, outer than fear and stronger than doubt. In the arid stretches of Burkina Faso's rural heartlands, where the soil had long been dismissed as lifeless and the future written off by foreign reports as hopeless, something extraordinary took place. A green revolution began to sprout, not from international aid or imported programs, but from the vision and command of a young African leader named Ibrahim Traoré. He did not wait for approval from global institutions or handouts from former colonial powers. Looked at the dry, cracked earth and saw potential. And with a voice full of conviction and a heart tied to his people's pain, he called on the citizens of Burkina Faso to rise with him. Over 10,000 answered that call. These were not trained environmentalists or well-funded NGO volunteers. They were farmers, mothers, youth, and elders. Many had never held a shovel for anything other than survival, yet they came together with one unified purpose: to bring their land back to life. Traoré's message was clear: Burkina Faso will no longer be a victim of environmental collapse or foreign neglect. It will write its own future, starting from the soil up. armed with basic tools, knowledge of traditional farming techniques, and a determination born from decades of struggle. These citizens launched one of the most impressive grassroots ecological efforts the African continent has seen in years. They did not just plant trees, they planted defiance. They dug irrigation canals, restored water flow, enriched soil with natural compost, and protected saplings with handmade barriers. They organized themselves into teams, rotated tasks by region, and tracked their progress with daily check-ins. Each small step was a blow against the narrative that Africa must wait for outside to help to solve its problems. This was not just a movement of labor, it was a movement of belief. A country often portrayed by foreign media as one defined by conflict or poverty, this initiative brought something rare: dignity. Those participating were not told what to do by outsiders. They were empowered by one of their own. Ibrahim Traoré didn't lead from a distance. He visited reforestation sites, spoke directly to volunteers, and participated in the planning as if he were one of them, because in truth, he was at just 34 years old. Traoré is unlike most heads of state. His leadership style is less about polished press conferences and more about boots on the ground. His call to mobilize 10,000 citizens wasn't a public relations stunt, it was a lifeline. Thrown to a nation that had been held underwater by decades of economic manipulation, environmental degradation, and foreign exploitation, in an era where so many leaders chase headlines and foreign deals, Traoré was planting roots literally. The areas targeted for restoration had been stripped bare by years of overuse, desertification, and climate neglect. Conventional experts said recovery would take decades, if not longer. But within months of Traoré's initiative, green patches began to return. The soil, once hard and infertile, slowly began to absorb water again. Native plants began to grow back. Birdsong returned to areas that had been eerily silent for years. More importantly, communities began to stay in place rather than migrate in search of better conditions. The revolution was not only ecological, it was social. Traoré understood something most Western advisors don't. In Africa, land is not just a resource. It is identity, history, and inheritance. When a people lose their land to climate or mismanagement, they lose far more than food. They lose pride, purpose, and belonging. By giving the land back to the people and inviting them to reclaim it with their own hands, Traoré wasn't just restoring forests, he was restoring souls. The ripple effect of this movement spread fast. Neighboring regions began to replicate the model. Farmers from across West Africa sent letters of solidarity, requesting guidance on how to begin similar initiatives in their own countries. As activists across the Sahel hailed Traoré as a symbol of modern Pan-African leadership: bold, grassroots-driven, and unapologetically sovereign. What makes this revolution even more powerful is its silence. There were no flashy billboards, no viral social media campaigns, and no celebrities posing for photos in tree nurseries. It was just the raw sound of effort: shovels breaking soil, boots moving across dry terrain, and voices singing songs of unity and labor as they worked. This wasn't done for the world to see. It was done because the people had nothing left to lose, everything to gain. To observers outside the continent, it might seem surprising that a small, landlocked country with limited resources could mobilize 10,000 citizens for such a task. But for the people of Burkina Faso, it was not a miracle, it was a necessity. This movement did not rise out of comfort, it rose from crisis. And under the guidance of a leader who believes in the power of people over politics, a new model was born, one where change doesn't wait for permission, and healing doesn't come from outside. Through this effort, Traoré didn't just plant trees. He planted a legacy. One that proves leadership is not about wealth, status, or external praise. It is about knowing your people, trusting them, and standing shoulder to shoulder with them when the world turns its back. The land breathe again, so the nation can breathe with it. The movement initiated by Ibrahim Traoré is far more than an environmental campaign. It is a powerful reflection of a continent stepping into its own strength, reasserting its independence not through political rhetoric or foreign diplomacy, but through direct action rooted in ecological revival and true self-reliance. In Burkina Faso, where years of colonial exploitation, economic manipulation, and environmental degradation left vast areas of land barren and lifeless, Traoré saw an opportunity not just to restore nature, but to reawaken the very spirit of African freedom. And he did it not by asking the world for help, but by asking his own people to believe in their land again. This is what makes the movement so unique. It does not depend on imported technology, international funding, or foreign consultants. It depends on trust in the land, and trust in the people. Traoré knew that the greatest resource in Burkina Faso was not buried underground or locked in a bank. It was walking on 2 feet in the form of everyday citizens. By mobilizing them to reclaim what was once lost, he turned environmental restoration into a national revival. When people come together to plant trees, they're not just fighting desertification, they're building ownership, pride, and resilience. For generations, African countries have been trapped in cycles of dependency where development was defined by how much aid was received or how many deals were signed with global powers. But this movement flipped the narrative. Instead of looking outward, it looked inward. It asked, what can we do with what we already have? That single question sparked a transformation. Communities began sharing traditional techniques for land recovery. Elders passed down wisdom on water conservation. Women organized local seed banks. Youth created cooperatives to distribute tools and track progress. What emerged was a living example of how powerful a nation can be when it stops waiting for permission and starts working with purpose. The deeper symbolism of this movement lies in its rejection of the myth that African progress must be guided or controlled by the West. For too long, international development in Africa has been framed as something done to Africans, not by Africans. But Traoré's initiative rejects that mindset. He showed that African nations are not laboratories for foreign experiments or charity cases for global pity. They are strong, intelligent, and capable societies with the wisdom and will to change their own conditions. Reclaiming the land wasn't just about food security or tree coverage. It was about taking control of the future without asking for outside validation. This ecological revival also reflects a deeper spiritual connection to the land. In African cultures, land is not just a physical space, it is sacred. It holds memory, identity, and legacy. When it is destroyed, it wounds more than the economy, it damages the people's sense of self. By restoring it, communities are restoring more than vegetation. They are restoring confidence, culture, and purpose. Each shovel of soil moved, each seed planted, is a step away from shame and dependency, and a step toward dignity and independence. Through this movement, Traoré has sparked something that can't be measured in statistics or satellite images. He has awakened a mindset that believes real change starts within. He has reminded his people and the entire continent that true power is not handed down from international summits or signed away in foreign contracts. It is cultivated at home, watered with belief, and protected with unity. In doing so, he has offered a new definition of African independence, not one based on borders or flags, but on the ability to stand tall, look to the soil, and say, "We did this ourselves." When news of Burkina Faso's reforestation movement began circulating internationally, few expected it to capture global attention in such a powerful way. But as the images and results of Ibrahim Traoré's ecological revolution spread across media channels, foreign governments, diplomats, environmental analysts, and even political celebrities began to take notice. What was initially viewed as a small grassroots initiative in a relatively unknown West African nation suddenly became a headline-grabbing phenomenon. Among those reported to be stunned by the scale and symbolism of the movement was none other than Donald Trump, a figure known for strong opinions and international skepticism. Trump's apparent reaction underscored just how wide the shockwaves from Burkina Faso's green uprising had traveled. The astonishment isn't just about the trees. It's about who led the effort, how it was executed, and what it represents in the global political narrative. In a world where headlines are dominated by superpowers, war, and economic collapse, the story of a young African president uniting 10,000 ordinary citizens to reclaim dead land with nothing but basic tools and shared purpose struck a deep chord. It challenged deeply held assumptions about Africa. For decades, Western narratives have portrayed African nations as dependent, disorganized, and in need of saving. But this movement turned that perception on its head. It showed a powerful, organized, self-sustaining people taking their future into their own hands, without any help from the so-called world powers. From Washington to Paris, the question started to rise. How did this happen under the radar? The answer lies in Traoré's leadership style. Unlike most politicians who rely on foreign press to validate their achievements, Traoré focused on action. There were no global press releases, no billion-dollar announcements at international conferences. There was just direct leadership, raw, honest, on the ground. And that authenticity is what caught the world by surprise, when foreign diplomats began to realize that thousands of acres of dead land had been revived without a single Western contractor, consultant, or NGO at the forefront. It forced an uncomfortable realization. Africa doesn't need foreign validation to succeed. This became a topic of discussion among global leaders. Environmental experts in Europe began citing Burkina Faso as a case study in climate resilience. South American leaders interested in rainforest protection quietly requested data from the Burkina Faso model. African diaspora groups across the globe hailed Traoré as a Pan-African icon. The movement, once quiet and local, it transformed into a symbol of global resistance against colonial environmental narratives. Donald, out. Trump's reported reaction may have seemed like a surprise at first, but it fits into a larger pattern. Defiant independence, his unapologetic nationalism, and his results-driven leadership represent qualities that often shake up established global hierarchies. Trump, a businessman at his core, is known to respect results. And the idea that a relatively poor African nation could pull off what many wealthier nations haven't been able to, mobilizing thousands for mass-scale environmental transformation, undoubtedly caused raised eyebrows in political and financial circles. The sheer scale of the land restored and the number of lives involved made it impossible to ignore. More broadly, Traoré's actions have ignited discussion about a new model of development. One that doesn't begin in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing, but in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. A model where African solutions are created by Africans, funded by African willpower, and carried out with African hands. This shift is revolutionary not because it uses new technology or futuristic innovation, but because it reclaims something very old and very powerful: belief in oneself. That belief is exactly what many global leaders struggle to grasp. For so long, African progress has been defined through external measurement tools, GDP reports, foreign aid benchmarks, and international rankings. What Traoré and his people achieved wasn't just measurable in satellite photos or UN reports. It was visible in the lives changed on the ground, in the trees that began to grow again, in the food that started to return to once barren fields, in the hope visible in the eyes of people who had long felt abandoned by both their own governments and the world. The movement's impact also reveals something else as global powers weren't prepared for: the influence of a new kind of African leader. Traoré's young, unbought, and unafraid to challenge international systems that have long dictated how African nations should function. That kind of leadership is difficult to control and nearly impossible to predict. And that is what makes it so powerful. In just a few short months, Traoré and the people of Burkina Faso have managed to shift the conversation about Africa from pity to pride, from crisis to capability, and from reliance to resilience. Done what decades of foreign conferences and climate pledges failed to do, they've made change real. And that kind of change sends a signal that no foreign leader can ignore. If you want to know the truth behind revolutionary events like the ones the world hides, then subscribe now. In the next video, you will find secrets that will change your perspective forever.